Hey, you got your ID on you, sir?
I'm not going to give it to you.
Okay, well, I need to identify you, okay?
No, you don't.
Yes, what's your name?
This is North Carolina, right?
What's your name?
Are we still in North Carolina? I don't have to give you nothing.
Then you need to...
I don't have to give you... What am I under arrest for? What is the
not
charge?
under arrest.
What is the charge? You just demanded...
A camera lens points at a building. Nothing more. No weapons, no threats, no criminal intent. Just glass and circuitry, capturing what happens in public view. And yet, within minutes, uniforms will converge, demands will be made, rights will be tested against the weight of badges. This is the anatomy of a First Amendment audit. Citizens who walk into public spaces, police stations, city halls, government buildings, and simply record. They don't hide, they don't sneak. They stand in plain sight and document what anyone walking past could see with their own eyes. The camera changes nothing about the legality of their presence, but it changes everything about how authority responds. The first encounter begins at a police training academy in North Carolina. The grounds are open, no fences block entry, no signs prohibit recording. A man stands at a reasonable distance, camera aimed at officers going through drills. His presence is noticed, then it becomes a problem. Watch how the approach unfolds. Not one officer, but several. They don't ask if he needs assistance, they don't inquire about his purpose in a neutral way. The first question carries an edge, a suggestion that his presence requires justification. He's asked to leave. When he asks why, the response circles back on itself. Because we're asking you to. The man doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't move closer. He poses a simple question that none of the officers can answer. Who did this hurt? The silence that follows speaks louder than any accusation they could make. No crime has been committed, no person has been endangered, no property has been damaged. The only thing disrupted is the assumption that filming requires permission. One officer's frustration becomes visible, not in violence, not yet, but in posture, in the tightening of the jaw, in the way he steps slightly forward. Authority is being questioned, and the questioner isn't backing down. This creates a problem that training didn't prepare them for. The script says citizens comply. This citizen knows the script is optional. The demand for identification comes next. It always comes next. In North Carolina, as in most states, there is no legal obligation to identify yourself to police unless you're being lawfully detained for a specific, articulable crime. Standing with a camera doesn't qualify. Looking at a building doesn't qualify. Existing in public view while an officer feels uncomfortable doesn't qualify. But the demand is made anyway, not because the law requires it, because the officer wants it. There's a difference between lawful authority and the expectation of obedience. In this moment, the gap between those two things becomes the entire battlefield. The man refuses, not aggressively, not with threats. He simply states the obvious. He's not required to provide identification when no crime has been committed. He mentions his attorney. He mentions civil litigation. These aren't threats, they're statements of consequence. If you violate my rights, there will be accountability. Watch the officers recalibrate, the energy shifts, the initial confidence wavers. Suddenly, the situation isn't as simple as moving along a troublemaker. Suddenly, there's a recording that will exist beyond this moment. Suddenly, every word spoken is evidence of how public servants treat the public they serve. This is the first lesson of the audit. The camera doesn't create rights. It reveals whether those rights are respected. The Constitution protects recording in public spaces regardless of whether anyone is watching. But the presence of documentation changes behavior. It introduces consequence into encounters where authority usually operates without review. The officers eventually disengage, not because they agree with the man, not because they suddenly understand the First Amendment. They disengage because continuing the confrontation offers no winning outcome. The recording exists, the rights were asserted. The choice becomes simple. Walk away or create evidence of escalation that will be reviewed by supervisors, attorneys, and the public. The man continues filming. The training continues behind him. Nothing has changed about the physical space. Everything has changed about who controlled the interaction. Georgia, a police department parking lot, Sunday afternoon. The building is closed, but the property remains what it has always been, public, owned by taxpayers, maintained by public funds, accessible to any citizen who wants to walk across it. A man with a camera approaches patrol vehicles. He doesn't touch them. He doesn't attempt to enter them. He walks between them, recording their exteriors, the same way any passerby might glance at cars in a lot. The difference is the lens. The difference is documentation. The difference is that someone is paying attention. Officer ASI approaches. Badge yer for. His opening isn't a greeting, it's a challenge. What are you doing? The question carries an assumption. This activity requires explanation. This presence requires justification. This citizen must account for himself. The man's response is calm. He's taking pictures. Public property. No restricted areas. No signs prohibiting access. He steps back to create space, to demonstrate non-aggression. The officer steps forward. The geometry of power is being established, 1 foot at a time. Then comes the demand, your ID, not a request, an order, as if the badge automatically converts a public parking lot into a checkpoint where papers must be produced. The man asks the question that should end the encounter. What crime do you suspect me of committing? The answer reveals everything. You're walking around our vehicles looking into them. Our vehicles. The possessive language exposes the confusion at the heart of the interaction. These are not the officer's vehicles. They belong to the city. They belong to the taxpayers who funded them. The officer is a custodian, not an owner. The public has every right to look at public property. But the officer doesn't see it that way. In his mind, the parking lot is territory. The vehicles are assets to be protected. The citizen is an intrusion to be investigated. The Constitution is an obstacle to be worked around. The detainment begins. Not for a crime, for suspicion, not for evidence, for the officer's discomfort. The man invokes his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. He states clearly that he's being detained. He asks for a supervisor. Each response is measured, documented, designed to create a record of what's happening. More officers arrive. The sergeant approaches with curiosity rather than aggression. What are you doing here? The man explains. First Amendment audits, testing whether public servants respect constitutional rights. The sergeant's response is telling. He doesn't know what that means. The concept of citizens actively verifying their rights is foreign to him. The conversation that follows is almost educational. The man explains the law. The sergeant listens, occasionally pushing back, but never with the aggression of the first officer. There's a recognition happening, slow, reluctant, but real. This citizen isn't breaking laws, he's testing whether officers will break them first. The initial officer hovers nearby, his frustration visible. He's invested in being right. He's demanded ID, issued threats, made a detainment. To admit the citizen was legally present the entire time would be to admit the entire interaction was unnecessary. His ego is now part of the equation. The man notices this. He addresses the sergeant directly, bypassing the officer who detained him. He asks to file a complaint. The sergeant's response is bureaucratic. You'd need to identify yourself for that. The man declines. He's not required to identify himself to file a complaint. He offers a name anyway. Good citizen. It's pointed, it's accurate. And it highlights everything wrong with how this encounter began. The detainment ends, not with an apology, not with acknowledgement, just a quiet dissolution of authority that was never legitimate in the first place. The man continues filming. The officers watch. The parking lot remains exactly what it was before anyone arrived. Public property, open to the public, subject to the same constitution that everyone present swore to uphold. Ramapo Town Hall, New York. The building serves the public. Taxpayers fund its operations. Citizens are supposed to be welcome here. A man enters with a camera. An employee confronts him immediately. You cannot film here. The statement is delivered as fact, as if building employees have the authority to suspend constitutional rights. The man continues recording. The employee threatens to call police. When officers arrive, there are many of them. 1 camera, 8 uniforms. The disproportion tells its own story. This isn't a response to danger, it's a response to discomfort. Someone in the building didn't like being recorded. The weight of the police department was deployed to address that preference. The sergeant approaches first. Her tone is authoritative. She demands identification. The man asks the question that should matter. Am I suspected of committing a crime? The answer is no. The demand continues anyway. This is where training collides with reality. Officers are taught to establish control. They're taught to gather information. They're taught that cooperation is expected and resistance is suspicious. They're not always taught where their authority ends. They're not always taught that citizens have the right to refuse. The man holds his ground. He's conducting lawful business. He's filing a Freedom of Information Act request. He's exercising his freedom of the press. Every statement he makes is accurate. Every right he cites is real. And none of it matters to the officers surrounding him. The demand escalates. You need to leave. The man asks why. The answer circles, because you were asked to leave. The logic is circular. The authority is assumed. The Constitution is treated as a suggestion rather than a constraint. A supervisor arrives, an attorney no less, someone who should understand the legal framework better than anyone present. The man expects reason. Instead, he receives the same demand: leave, stop filming, comply. The man points out the obvious. The supervisor is opening himself to civil litigation. This isn't a threat, it's an observation. When government employees violate constitutional rights on camera, consequences follow, lawsuits are filed, taxpayers pay settlements, careers are affected. These aren't hypotheticals. They're documented outcomes of encounters exactly like this one. The standoff continues. More officers gather. The man documents each one, collecting names and badge numbers. Some provide them willingly. One refuses, citing fear of retaliation. The irony is thick. A uniformed officer claiming vulnerability while surrounding a single citizen with a camera. Then something shifts. A lieutenant arrives. He assesses the situation differently than everyone before him. He sees a citizen exercising rights, not a threat requiring removal. He sees a camera, not a weapon. He sees a building that belongs to the public, not territory to be defended. The lieutenant speaks to the supervisor. Whatever he says, it works. The crowd of officers disperses. The man is allowed to continue. No arrest, no forcible removal. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the entire confrontation was unnecessary. The man addresses the departing officers. "You're dismissed. Please don't detain me unlawfully anymore." The words are calm. The message is clear. The recording captured everything: the initial confrontation, the escalation, the demands, the resolution. Every officer who participated is now documented. Every statement made is preserved. This is what accountability looks like. Not punishment, documentation. Not revenge, evidence. A citizen exercised rights that belong to everyone. Some officers tried to suppress those rights. One officer recognized they couldn't be suppressed. The camera recorded all of it. The building remains open. The man continues his business. The Constitution remains intact, not because everyone respected it, but because one person insisted on it.